Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Cowen. Welcome. In early 2004, the White Paper Regulating Better set out core principles of good regulation and a programme of actions to give effect to these. It was drafted and published by the government. In December 2006, you announced a proposal for modernisation of the legislative regulatory framework. An advisory group was set up by the department. Based on these facts, would you say that it was the government who set the tone how regulation should be carried out, or was it the financial regulator making the decisions?
Well, obviously, the government, if you have a legislative framework, it's the government that makes the decision as to what the legislation looks like. Clearly, in an issue of such as this, which is quite complex and specialised, you need to have the inputs of people who are working on the front line, who understand the industry, understand where the trends of the industry are going. So you'd have inputs from all of them. Relating to the specific point you raise about this question of consolidating the legislation into one act, that was, if you like, a recommendation of the McDowell report, to have a unified legal framework to underpin, if you like, effective and efficient operation of a single regulatory authority for financial services. There was a lot of stuff coming in from the EU as well. There was a lot of directives and things like that. So there was a need to pull this together and to have that, if you like, as a sort of a window to potential investors in the future as to what the regulatory situation in Ireland was, to be able to communicate that in a coherent way rather than having 5 or 6 statutes all over the place and directives here and all the rest of it. So from an administrative clarity point of view, as well as a policy clarity point of view, it was suggested that we would do it that way. To answer your question, was the tone set? I think, at the end of the day, government must take responsibility for legislative proposals it brings forward. But I believe that the principles that are set out in the wider regulation document you're talking about is again about Ireland. It's in Ireland's interest as a small, open economy to have modern frameworks, to be updated in its laws, to have legal certainty. That's an important point for potential investors. To have, if you like, a continuum of policy regardless of political changes of government. That involves cooperation at the political level, at the Oireachtas level, to make sure people buy into the concept. So that's all part of the democratic consideration of these things. But in a case as specialised as this, without contradicting myself, clearly, the advisory forum that was set up to begin the work on doing a heads of a bill would involve people from the industry that would be well regarded, have good reputation with the Department of Finance, working with our own draftspeople to come up with a proposal that would meet the requirements not only of today but of the future as well.
Was there an over-dependency on advisory? Or was there hands-on input from the Cabinet of the day to say, look, we need this, we need that?
Yeah, well, there was a memo for government brought to the Cabinet. The individual ministers, in this case myself, this was work that we were engaged in. From the time the IFSC was born, it was a relatively new baby. In fact, it came in the late 80s. One of the reasons for its success was the fact that there was this, for a small country, what you expect, a cooperative approach between industry and government to facilitate investment in an area such as this that would provide good jobs, good remuneration jobs, and also good revenue for the country in the future. And I think that that cooperative idea, which is part of what I think some of the best parts of social partnership, the idea that people who have a stake in this society, not just in relation to financial services, but in relation to areas generally, that the issue for working people's interests isn't just about narrow wage considerations. It's about wider issues where they have a say in education policy and all this. It's all about consulting people where they have an expertise to get the job done in a way that puts us in a good position to compete.
Okay, we're just drifting a bit. Were you aware, while you were Minister, that there was no enforcement of prudential regulatory breaches in the banks?
Was I aware personally? I was aware that obviously there was a new regulatory setup, that they were engaging with the industry, and that I was aware that there hadn't been an administrative sanction. Now that sometimes indicates to a busy minister that there aren't as many problems in there as someone else might be saying.
Was that the case? Was it a case that you just weren't told, or were you aware?
Now, as I say, it's an important principle here that I want to emphasise. The independence of the regulatory function must be acknowledged. It's one of the prices you pay. If you want to have a regulatory function that is seen to be independent, then it must be independent. And that means that there aren't political inputs coming in from the side to say, you should be going harder on this fellow than you should be going on that fellow.
No, I get that. But were you told, and it's just that I'm under a bit of pressure time and a few bits to get through, so would it be a yes or a no in terms of were you told, look, there's been no enforcement of regulation?
I don't recall any conversation.
Okay, that's good. Can I ask, you mentioned there the cooperative approach of the IFSC, and we've had other evidence from the Governor of the Central Bank of the time and since. Was there a policy of don't scare the horses when it came to the IFSC, when it came to enforcing prudential regulatory breaches?
I don't think so. We were interested. I mean, we're interested in reputation issues for the country as well. You know, we're not interested in this. Was often wrongly described as a tax haven, even by some in our own domestic political system who didn't know any better. This is a properly regulated international financial services centre that has a high reputation worldwide for competence and specialisation.
Evidence from the central bank and regulator to say about a number of contrarian views that were there about various things over the period. Did the governor or the regulatory authority chairman ever advise you of contrarian views within either the regulator or the central bank?
No, I would get once a thing comes to the minister, you get whatever the official position is. But if there are, he may emphasise to me certain things about downside risks or upside risks. You know, his job would be to reflect. If people are saying, look, I'm going with this report, but I'd like to bring to the attention of the minister that some of us are a little more pessimistic about that than others. You know, I'm sure any conscientious chairman or chief executive would reflect that. And sometimes I would hear the governor speaking, and he's a very measured man. He's not a man prone to exaggerated language. He would give the view and would give it, I would think, conscientiously.
Can I ask, and just if you could answer me quickly on this, because it's leading to another question. When one becomes a minister first, would you say one is more probing at that stage than, say, when one is a minister for a term or a term and a half?
I don't know. It depends on what you're dealing with. I don't think so. I mean, you're talking about a bit of ministerial capture now, are you?
No, just in time, does one become reliant and trusting of the advice that comes?
Well, what one does is one usually identifies very good people very quickly and realise that maybe there are some other people not quite as good. And you sort of, you know, that happens in every organisation. But I think that you know, when you're younger, probably you may be a bit more of a firebrand than 20 years later. So,
and this isn't to give any judgment at all, but it's merely to ask, if hindsight were real time, was 16 years as a cabinet minister too much? Were we on autopilot as a government?
No, I don't accept that. No. I honestly don't accept that. I mean, the size of the problems that we ultimately have to deal with were huge, and there's some states who are trying to deal with them now and are not as advanced in their resolution as we are. But when you're there, you see, what you do is you have a successful industry. It has a good reputation, and you're trying to develop that, and you're going to the next step. So this modern legislation wasn't about, oh, let's sit on our laurels and just let's do a little legislative job. This was about saying, where are the trends going? Where are these industries going in the future? How can Ireland continue to position itself in a competitive way? There's nothing wrong with being competitive. There's nothing wrong with being competitive. But it doesn't compromise, and this is my basic point to you when you're hearing some of these arguments. It doesn't compromise or undermine the primary function, which was to regulate effectively. There were adequate powers. There were obviously lessons to be learned as to why things weren't picked up. And there are lessons that the Department of Finance has to learn, there's lessons that Ministers of Finance have to learn, there's lessons that Taoiseach have to learn. I'm not suggesting that anyone is exempt from being scrutinised and all of this stuff, but I don't accept that we were sort of sitting there, not worrying what way it goes. The country was, let's remember, guys, the country was going pretty well. It was going well. We had a lot of success. Now, what happens is then, when things change, you have to be flexible. You have to be ready. You have to be prepared to move in a different direction. And sometimes, unfortunately, that can involve you in some very unpopular decisions, but they have to be taken in the interest of us trying to rebuild and recover as quickly as we can.
Finally, to what extent did social partnership frame the budgetary process, and did it serve us well in the period?
Well, I certainly think, people, it's become very fashionable now to run down social partnership. I remember the 80s. I remember being a backbench deputy in 87 and how difficult things were. And I believe that the methodology that we used then, that was undertaken by then Taoiseach Mr. High, was the right way to go and is the right way to go. We can't have, like in some countries, traditional arguments about capital and labour based on old 19th century models of, you come in here and talk to me about your wages and you have nothing else to say about life. We have working people, we have educated people in this country. We don't have, thankfully, a class society. We have a certain sense of community and society about us. I believe that the social partnership model, in many ways, worked very well. Obviously, there were some mistakes. There was over-ambition in some respects. There was maybe a need to relook at the institutional setup from time to time. But it did work for this country, and it put everyone on the same page without compromising people's right to represent their own interests. And what we now have is what's called by the present government social dialogue.
Did it frame the budgets of the time?
It framed the budget. Of course it helped, because you had social partnership programmes to implement. You did deals with people. But they were on the basis that we would have it was an overall fiscally responsible and financially responsible framework. And unless you have people all facing in the one way in this country, it is very difficult to get things sorted. And let's remember, that whilst we went through the crisis and we weren't able to, through the social partnership process, come up with some agreements on reductions in pay, etc., which is understandable. It would be very difficult to achieve in the best of times. The fact is that the culture that has been inculcated through social partnership meant that we got that resolved eventually, and we got it resolved in a negotiation. There are other people who don't have that that vehicle for social partnership, who are now struggling greatly to the detriment of many people that those interests represent. And I think, we shouldn't take it for granted. Yes, a remodelling of it. Yes, ensure we don't make some mistakes in the past. Maybe, yes, less of the detail and a bit more generality rather than getting into the, drilling down into every area of policy. But I do believe that, yes, working people are interested in a number of places in university as much as they are interested in what the health service is like, as much as they're interested in what social welfare provision you can make for our ill and sick. These are wider social contracts that should be held together by the widest possible consensus of people. And social partnership is something, by the way, that is a stated aim and objective of our own party to pursue.
Mr. Cowen.